Well, hello my friends. Uh-oh, I forgot to plug in my mic. I feel like I did that recently. We're gonna plug it in. Hello everybody, welcome. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to Vlogmas. Today is day 7. So, today is day 7, and instead of actually having a Vlogmas, we're still going to have our tea tasting, and then I'm just going to talk to you about the books that I read in November that I haven't talked about yet. So kind of like a recent reads, except for excluding the books I've been reading in December and already been talking to you about. So let's talk about the books that I've read in December. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 books to talk to you about. One of them is just going to be brief because it was a Patreon exclusive read. But let's do our tea tasting first. So I'm going to turn this mug towards you so you can see the gold Holly Jolly, maybe? But that feels weird to drink it out of my left hand, so we're going to do this. So today's flavor is almond cardamom cake. It is rooibos tea base, which is my favorite herbal tea base, cocoa nibs, cinnamon, cardamom pods, cardamom toasted almond flavor, white cornflour. So it smells like a very light almond flavor, and I can definitely smell the cardamom, which I love. That is honestly very good. I think that the almond is just the perfect amount. It doesn't feel overpowering. The cardamom makes it very warm and subtly spiced. I don't know what white cornflower is. I can't really taste cocoa nibs, but maybe that's just kind of... Ooh, I like that. Contributing to how warm and cozy it is. I really, really like that. So, okay, now let's get into the reviews. So the first one that I want to talk about are 2 books that I read for a historical romance book club that I do with Jen from the Book Refuge. So the first one I'm going to review is the one that I picked. This is a quarterly book club. Our next book club live show will be February, and that will be, we don't have the date for that one yet, but we're going to be rereading favorites. So I picked 9 Rules to Break When Romancing a Rake by Sarah McLean, because I really wanted to read her debut historical again because it's been a long time, and I feel like I didn't love this one as much as most people did. Like, it's certainly not my favorite Sarah McLean, so I kind of want to see if my feelings have changed on that. And Jen picked Kingdom of Dreams, which I actually haven't read yet, so I'm excited to finally have a chance to read that. So those are our books for the February book club. So let's talk about these ones. So Of Lands High and Low by Martha Keyes is a book that I had seen Erin on Instagram. She had talked about this book, raved about it. This is an author that I had in my Kindle for a while because she often came up when people were talking, or when I was looking at Nicole Van books on Kindle, I would often get suggested Martha Keyes. So I didn't have this specific one, but I had other ones sitting. One had a horse on the cover, so obviously that's why. Had been sitting in my Kindle, but I just really wanted, Jen and I had like so many duds, I feel like, in our historical romance book club, so we were really hoping these ones were going to be hits, and this book ended up being pretty divided in the book club. Most people really struggled with it, and I totally understand that. I personally gave it 6 stars. So this is set in Scotland, and during the time of smallpox. I think it was like 1700, 1600, I can't exactly remember, probably 1700. But it was deeply historical in time setting. And so we have Highlanders and we have this outbreak of smallpox, which is killing people and is just awful. And they have an opportunity to have some people virulated, not vaccinated, to try and prevent them from getting the disease, but because of the time period and the location of this, that was often seen as something that was trying to hamper God's will, or something that was not necessarily witchcraft, but it was seen as something like, we're not going to do that, we're going to trust in God, which speaks to the time period, these people who were steeped in their religion at the time and had a big impact on everything that they said and did and the choices that they made. So the young doctor comes to the town with hopes to virulate the people, and he comes with a good amount of baggage. He's the hero. He comes with a good amount of baggage because in his attempts to save his father from smallpox, he actually ended up dying. And the heroine, for her part, is, she wants to get virulated, and she wants to have other people have that opportunity too. So that's the core plot of the book, is them trying to get past this town, which is so steeped in we're not going to do anything because God's will and things like that. A lot of, like, I am oversimplifying it greatly. Like, the book goes into a lot of detail and makes it feel very nuanced and like a very difficult thing for these people at the time, and how hard it was for them to kind of wrap their heads around this new concept that could potentially save lives, but they're not entirely sure. It's not without its own risks, you know? So the hero and the heroine end up working closely together to get through this. And this book is largely plot-driven and historical fiction-driven. Like, I would say, honestly, that this book feels more like historical fiction. If I was just going to say this is historical fiction, which I haven't really read a ton of, that's not a genre that I go out and seek out. Historical romance is, but historical fiction isn't typically something, honestly, I'm interested in a whole lot. But if I were to categorize this as a historical fiction, I would also say it does have a strong romance that ends in an HEA. But if I'm trying to categorize this as a historical romance, I would say it's heavy on the historical fiction. The romance is there, you get a HEA, but you might feel not completely satisfied with the romance if you are used to reading like a Lisa Kleypas, a Tessa Dare, even a Mary Belloc. Like, this is not going to feel like that. It's very much deeply in the plot of trying to help these people survive against smallpox. And the thing that I think makes that work so beautifully for me is because of that, we see these great character dynamics, specifically between the hero and heroine, but also we get to see very subtle, small character growth as they're going through this daily life. So this book feels deeply realistic, and that's not always a fun thing to read, especially when you're talking about times of plagues or outbreaks and things like that, because trigger warning for this, there's a lot of death that happens in here. There's a death of children, there is a lot of sadness, and it's not fun to read all the time, right? Now, by the time I had finished this book and I had seen their romance grow and develop, I was moved so deeply. Like, I found this to be deeply moving. I loved the romance, but it is a very, 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 very slow and subtle burn. This is closed door and everything like that. Actually, I don't even know if it's closed door, but it might just be just sweet. Like, there's nothing even suggested on the page. Like, they don't just go and close the door on you. You know what I mean? I'm never quite sure how to categorize that. But I feel like this book captures something that I'm always looking for with every type of book that I read, and that is a glimpse, some feeling, some deep feeling about this is what it is to be human. And I think that something that makes that always work for me especially is when you have the darkest darks of humanity next to like the brightest lights. And that is largely what this is. Even though the darkest darks were because of illness, viruses, things that they couldn't control, it was putting these people in extremely dark times. They were losing loved ones, they were losing children. But at the same time, you see this beautiful romance. You see people believing in each other, giving people a chance, trying to overcome hurts and failures. And I just love that type of book so much. But the main reason I initially gave it 5 stars is because it was just too sad. There's just a lot of death in here, you know? And romance readers, we don't really like that, right? Like, we want our happily ever afters. And if there's some death, like, I'm not really a huge fan of death in romance, personally. On the page, at least. My chair is squeaking. I have these sweatpants on, and they have cargo pockets, and they're kind of squeaky and noisy. But anyways, so I absolutely loved this book. I did finally decide to bump it up to a 6 star because it was one of those that I couldn't stop thinking about. I just found it so moving and beautiful, and it encapsulated that human experience of striving for more, striving to overcome. It's so beautiful for me that I just adored it. But again, I have a hard time categorizing this as a historical romance because while there is romance in there and it's beautiful, it doesn't feel like a historical romance in what I think we've come to expect, you know? So, the next book that I read was the Tribune Temptation. So this author, I believe this is this author's debut. I could be wrong, but this is set in the Roman Empire. Roman history, Roman times. I don't know. The Roman Empire is not my Roman Empire, you know? Like, you know I was waiting to say that joke, right? But it was very interesting. So this one was fun. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought the writing was particularly strong. I liked the characters. I think they were really well developed. I loved their romance. This book does something in here that I really, really love, and it is how their feelings are expressed and discovered through intimacy, and largely through the hero kind of trying to prove to the heroine that this is actually not something to be hated or tolerated, that this can be about her, and that's how they start to fall in love. They have an arranged marriage, by the way. I'll get to that in a minute. We're going to talk about the intimacy first. And it was just really, really beautiful to see that on the page, and I really felt like it had a big impact on my feelings about the romance itself. But basically in this book we have our heroine who has recently been divorced. She cannot have children, and so her husband divorced her, and so she's sent back to live with her parents, and she just sort of feels like, well, my life is over now, I guess. I'm going to just be stuck at my parents, and this sucks because I had a taste of freedom. Even though she didn't love her husband, she had this taste of freedom, and now it's gone. And our hero is now a freed man. He was a slave at some point, and he's now freed, and he has great political aspirations. And he feels like in order to have any chance at gaining those political aspirations, he needs to marry well. So that's when his friend kind of says, hey, this woman has a good family, and I bet that she would marry you because she can't have children and all this other stuff. So they have a temporary, what they call a temporary marriage of convenience, for his political gains and for her to have some freedom, with the whole idea being that when they finally, like when he reaches his political goals, he will then quietly divorce her, give her her own property, and she can live her own life, you know? But of course, things are never quite that simple, right? There are complications that come up with a boy that they find that they potentially may adopt in the future. There are complications that come up with some sabotage, with some blackmail, there's some secrets that have kept between the two of them. Like, there's a lot of stuff happening in here that is going to try and tear them apart. And I know when we had our live show for this, the third act conflict was a major source of division upon who loved it and who didn't. And I think that I was pretty forgiving of the conflict because I think that it was easy for me to get on board with it and to understand both of their points of view and why they made the decisions that they did. And that is always something that I'm looking for in the third act conflict, is I want to see, okay, does it feel realistic to me that this character would make this choice that is going to then try and separate them? Does this feel realistic to me, you know? And in this book, it did. Realistic as in true to their characters, true to who the author has created them to be, right? And I think that it definitely did in this book. So I really liked it. I think that the main reason I gave this one 4 stars instead of 5, because I thought it was really quite fun, is that it didn't really have the emotional impact that I was hoping for in a 5-star romance, but also the language in here, the dialogue is extremely modern. Like, it feels modern. And so much in the way that it almost feels like these are people cosplaying in like a toga and sheets, you know? But all of that being said, that wasn't a huge detractor. It wasn't that obvious. I'm being a little, I'm being a little bit overblown on that. But it is there, and it is something that I noticed. And if you are a reader who really can't tolerate any amount of that, then that will probably drive you crazy. But it really, I felt like it was done well. And I liked the author's voice. I liked the plot setup. I liked the characters enough that I was like, that's all right. It's all right by me. So 4 stars for that one. Okay, so then I read Brimstone by Callie Hart. So I read this pretty much right away. I went out and got it when it released. I had the audio, so I did not read this physically. I listened to the audio of this. And I will say that I've seen a lot of people complain about editing errors as far as like grammar and punctuation. I truly didn't notice any of that. I really do feel like the audio narration of this was of very high quality. Both the narrators were excellent, and I was just captivated by their storytelling, by their voices, and the story itself. I actually really enjoyed this. Like, I gave this 5 stars. I thought it was a lot of fun. For me, this book didn't have the pitfalls that book 1 did, which was one of the major things that bugged me about book 1, and I think this happens a lot in indie romance first-person point of view, is over-description. You're overly describing the eyes, and you're overly describing their abs, their lips, their hair, how they look. Like, so much of what I have read recently, not all certainly, but a lot, specifically in the last 1 or 2 years, in indie contemporary romance that is in first person, is that over-description. And I get why the author's doing that. They want to show you how the heroine is so captivated by their appearance, but it seems in a lot of ways just overblown. You're describing it too much. I don't need all of this information. I don't need a perfect exact replica of what he looks like right now. Can you show me how she feels about him, how attracted she is to him in other ways that are not just her looking at him and giving you a 10-minute breakdown of what he looks like? So I went on a tangent, sorry. That's largely a problem I had with Brimstone. And not just in how she describes the hero, but in everything around her. Like, I feel like this is a huge weakness, first-person point of view, indie romances have. Whether it's fantasy, it happens a lot in fantasy romance, it happens a lot in contemporary romance. There's way too much describing everything that the character is seeing. When realistically, if we're actually being told the story, we're not clocking everything. Yeah, I know you're trying to give us a good picture of the world, of the story, but let's be judicious in how much we describe when we're in first person. It can be very, very, very frustrating for me. So I felt like that was handled much better in Brimstone. I felt like their character relationship, their romantic relationship interaction was a lot better. It was way more enjoyable. We didn't have to constantly rely on this sort of forced hate, enemies to lovers, which is what I kind of felt like book 1 had. Instead, in this book, they're in a relationship, they're established, and so we get to see them struggle and go through things in the fantasy world as they're already a couple, which I found really, really good. I also really enjoyed the way that she built and developed her fantasy world in this version, in this volume. What the heck, can I not talk today? In the second book, as opposed to what happened in Quicksilver. Like, I feel like this world was much more clearly thought out. I felt like she had a more clear idea of where her plot was headed. I really liked the side characters. I felt like the romance was great, and we had enough of that while still keeping it interesting with the fantasy world and the plot that was happening there. So yeah, I did not find this slow. I did not find myself uninterested. I really enjoyed it. And again, big props to the narrators because they were excellent. But I enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun with it. So I did give it 5 stars. I had fun. Okay, and then I read Blackthorn by JT Geisinger. So I've read JT Geisinger, some of her mafia romances, and I've liked her books enough that I was very interested when I heard this was her fantasy romance debut. Now, to be fair, I feel like this is more urban fantasy or like a gothic fantasy romance as opposed to straight fantasy romance, because this is in our world with just like fantastical things happening, which to me puts that in urban fantasy. But I have heard people say it's gothic fantasy, which I can see, but to me it's more solidly urban fantasy because we have witches, we have demons, we have mysterious things happening. It feels a lot like early 2000s urban fantasy with strong romance or even paranormal romance. Like, I really, really loved it. Probably paranormal romance is a better way to say this because you do have the witches and the demons and things like that. So yeah, that's probably the word that I used in my review and the word that I was looking for. This feels solidly like a early 2000s paranormal romance, and I enjoyed it immensely. I think that this book, for me, was extremely readable. Like, I started reading this, I finished it in less than a day. I could not put it down. Again, this is another one I listened to the audio, which was excellent. Like, I wanted to finish this so bad. I was so compelled. I was so invested in the story. And I think that says a lot about this author's writing style. Her writing style, to me, is extremely conversational in tone, to where it just feels like a friend is telling you the story, whether that's a male or female narrator, and I really, really, really love that. I especially like the way that she does banter. I feel like way too many fantasy romance authors are trying to go real hard on the banter, and it ends up feeling forced or cringy or fake. The banter in this was exceptionally top tier. This also has something in it that I have a particular weakness for, and that is a second chance romance. So these two fell in love as teenagers, and now she has come back to town, to this, essentially haunted paranormal town, because her mother or her grandmother, I can't remember, one of those ladies, I think it's her grandmother, died, and so she's coming back to the funeral, and she's bringing along her teenage daughter with her. She has some aunts who are a little kooky and very mysterious. They have a lot of powers, and the hero is very mysterious as well. It's very clear that he has some powers, but we don't know exactly what they are, and this book is just shrouded in mystery in a way that feels very satisfying. Like, she gives you a little bit of details, pulls you along a few more details, but you don't ever really get any big reveal until the end, and I think that makes for a really compelling reading experience. So all of those things combined, great writing style, great characters, great banter, a relatable real-world setting with some paranormal elements, and then a mystery plot that with just a touch of the paranormal that we don't really understand and know what's happening yet, that's pulling you along, was so much fun. Like, I really, really enjoyed that part of it, right? Now, as we get to the end, some things happen that literally had my jaw on the floor. And, like, I was just like, what? Not even towards the end. Like, towards the middle of the book, things are happening. And I'm like, is she going where I think she's going to go? I hope she doesn't. And it's never fully resolved until finally it is. And this whole time, there's tension building. There's things happening. And you're just sort of like, oh my gosh, I hope this is not actually happening, what I think is happening. But then the very end, like the climactic scene, was so bonkers. Like, bonkers not in a bad way, but bonkers in a really true 2000s paranormal romance that I was just like, I can't believe what I'm witnessing. I truly can't believe what I'm witnessing. Like, it was bonkers. And honestly, props to her for doing that. Like, she really went there. She really went there. And there were some things that happened, and I was like, I'm sorry, what is happening, right? Like, when I first marked this as read on my, freaking Instagram story, you know, the little grid with like the pictures of what I've read and whatever, I put, instead of a star rating, I put WTF, because I was like, what did I just read? And initially I was like, I can't decide if this is a 2-star or a 5-star. And I finally settled on a 4-star because it was just so much fun. The reading experience of this was so much fun. There were definitely some things at the ending that kind of squicked me out and made me like, I don't know what I'm watching right now or listening or to, but ultimately it was fun. So I think this would be a great read for spooky season. It's a shame it's behind us, but if you're in the mood for anything like what I'm talking about, I would give it a try. But heed the trigger warnings if you need them. Okay, and then the last book is, actually, I feel kind of bummed that I can't talk about it, but it is, I do have a video, a full reading vlog review on my Patreon. This is the Patreon book that we picked for, or I picked and everybody's on board with me, but it's A Rose in Winter. So I finally read my first Kathleen Woodiwiss, and I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I felt like it was much, much better than I think I was afraid of. I feel like she gets kind of a bad rap with modern readers, and I don't really understand that because she is an exceptionally talented writer, exceptionally talented storyteller, really great with characters. I had a good time reading this, but that's all I'm going to say. So now I do for sure want to read more from her because I really enjoyed that reading experience, and I'm very intrigued to see what else she has. Like, on the back of that book, A Rose in Winter, I have the physical. I just didn't bring them in here because I'd be lazy, and you can see the picture better anyway. But on the back of it, it says she's sold like 15 million copies, and that specific book was published in 1982. So in 1982, she had already sold 15 million copies. Like, that's pretty awesome. So I see why she was so popular for a reason. When we cleaned out my parents' house when they moved a few years ago, I found an old copy of The Wolf and the Dove that I kept, and I was just like, wow, even my mom had a copy of this. So anyway, alright my friends, I'm going to close this vlog. My battery is barking at me. It's going to die. But thank you so much for coming along on this episode of Vlogmas. Let me know your thoughts on any of these book reviews that I've given you, and if you just want to let me know that you're here, please leave me any type of cup emoji, tea cup, coffee cup, whatever, and I'll see you all in my next episode of Vlogmas. Thanks so much for being here.